Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I'm Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. In our ongoing series about AI, today we are going to discuss how artificial intelligence can help in accelerating the nation's economic growth with Mr. Sumeysh Srivastava. Mr. Srivastava is Senior Manager, Public Policy at the Quantum Hub. His research interests are primarily in areas of technology, information, and rights in the digital space. He writes on issues that look at the intersection between technology, law, society, and access for both academic and non academic purposes. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talk, Sumeysh.
Thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to take part in this conversation, and especially on a theme and an area where policy is being made as we speak, right? Policy is being developed, a lot of conversations are happening. Even the technology itself is still being developed as we speak. So it's a really exciting time to sort of have this conversation and be part of the discourse around AI, how it's being deployed in India, and the space regulatory landscape around it. So yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to be taking part.
So before we talk about AI, I want to put focus on the insufficient development of infrastructure and issues that we face, like unstable broadband, electricity, lack of necessary devices. Do you think such deficiency pose a risk to the widespread and equitable implementation of AI for users nationwide?
So that's an interesting question, and I'm going to take this back a bit when we talk about infrastructure specifically for AI. When I was reading up for this discussion, I think the main components that I came across when we're talking about what needs to be in place for AI deployment are mainly things like having a IoT ecosystem where you have enough people who have devices connected to the internet, you have enough cloud computing and data center capacity, and then you need to have enough clean data sets that can feed into the AI models. And obviously, some of the base layer infrastructure that you've talked about in terms of broadband connectivity, in terms of electricity. So some of the other elements I'll maybe speak to a bit later. But in terms of infrastructure, it's a very important conversation to have because otherwise, if we see both in terms of adoption as well as India's contribution to the AI revolution, we are trying to really move ahead and be at the forefront. IBM did this Global AI Adoption Index report, which came out last year, and around 59% of enterprise scale organizations in India are already actively using AI in their businesses. And I think that is the one major shift that has happened in the last 1 year. We already had different companies using AI in their functions, from how Amazon makes recommendations to you about your products to even how the income tax department is analyzing our tax returns, right? AI is being used across for some time. I think the shift that has happened in the last 1 year is we have more user-facing AI. So what OpenAI did with ChatGPT, like that was actually a revolutionary point in this journey. And yeah, so how this grows further and whether people are able to actually leverage the AI revolution, a lot of it depends on stable broadband, reliable electricity, access to affordable devices, and especially without this robust infrastructure, especially in rural areas, there already exists a digital divide in India, and that will hinder the equitable distribution of AI benefits across the nation. Now, I want to bring attention to this aspect that when we talk about a digital divide, it's also important to understand that the people being left behind are people who are otherwise also more marginalized in society, right? So there is a urban-rural divide in terms of the digital divide. There's a divide based on gender, where women have less access to internet and devices. There's a divide based on age, where access to internet as well as the ability to use the internet is lower amongst senior citizens. And this is just the infrastructure part, right? If I come to the other side, if we talk about digital literacy and the capability to access digital devices or the internet, that's something where I think we really need to focus in India, where it's not enough to have the devices available, have the infrastructure available for people. You also need to equip people to be able to benefit and access these infrastructure point. And to its credit, like I would say, this is something that the government is also quite focused on. So in terms of expanding the reach of wireline broadband in rural areas. We already have good coverage of wireless internet all over India, right? Mobile internet almost works almost everywhere, but for advanced applications like the ones that AI is going to bring, you need more reliable wireline internet in India. You need more data centers all across India. So I think a lot of this, there are some interplays with the Telecom Act as well, in terms of the rules that will come out from the Telecom Act. If they can simplify India's licensing framework, make it easy to roll out more infrastructure, roll out more services for people, I think that will help a lot. Even in terms of, if you see in the Telecom Act, like data centers will depend on your right of way and infrastructure, right? So if we are able to give a more transparent and certain framework for that, that will create incentives for more infrastructure to come up. And I mean, internationally, if you see countries like South Korea and Singapore, one of the reasons they have been more successful in AI initiatives reaching citizens is because they've implemented a comprehensive infrastructure development plan that's gone along with it. So it has to be looked at holistically. And just a few interesting points from the India AI mission, which I think came out last year. So one specific point that I would like to focus on is about the GPU capacity that they're looking to build. So I think it's around 10,000 GPUs or something. So the thing is, it also shows that we are trying to build domestic resilience on this issue. So overall, 10,000 GPUs, if you compare it with what the US companies have or what other Western countries have, it is not a major amount, but it's also not an insignificant amount either, right? So it shows that India is investing in building this infrastructure. If you look at the focus on semiconductors that the government has been pushing on recently, a lot of that will feed into how easy it will be for people to access and adopt these solutions. And I feel there is a lot more work and investment required in this, but I do think that we have made a decent start on this. And maybe a couple of other things that I would suggest we can sort of start looking at from this aspect is we can also look at offline AI solutions. So there are applications and AI models out there that can function without constant internet connection, which leverage techniques like on-device machine learning, right? Um, and also in terms of access to devices, we should be looking to encourage production and distribution of more affordable smartphones and tablets, right? You need to give people the medium to access these sort of technologies. So I think in the medium term, maybe things like offline AI solutions, low cost devices are something to focus on. But in the long term, yeah, a lot more work and investment is required at the infrastructure level, which I feel we are going in that direction.
Other than investment and a good regulatory approach by the government, what roles can AI startups play? Like, how can AI startups contribute to propelling India into a leading position in the global tech landscape?
So again, here I would first maybe take a step back and take a look at the role that the current startups that we have, the sort of role that they have played in terms of India's growth story. So I mean, whatever the contributions to the economy, skill building, everything is there. But I think one thing that has they've done really well is applying global technology solutions to local problems and local contexts and innovating within that context to solve India specific problems, right? So I would say there are two things here. Startups, because of their focus on innovation, because of their focus on agility and adaptability, as well as their potential for job creation, I think they have a very crucial role to play. And also because startups can also tailor solutions to specific industries and societal needs, which is maybe something that bigger companies are not always agile enough to do. So I would say innovation as well as the adaptability are two very strong points where startups have the potential to really help uh, India move into a leading position in the global tech landscape. But before that, like, how do you enable startups to do this, right? Like, there are certain preconditions that we need to sort of focus on. So, one is obviously support from the government, and that comes um, from the angle of a clear and consistent regulatory framework. And at the stage at which AI is right now, I would say a clear, consistent, and a light touch regulatory framework is what we need right now, as well as maybe funding grants, tax incentives are all initiatives that the government can do. Then the other thing is we need to encourage collaboration between industry and academia so that there is a ready supply of skilled AI talent, right? So, like maybe focusing more on internships, research partnerships, skill development initiatives can bridge that talent gap because the startups who are looking to build solutions will also need access to uh, that talent and obviously like access to capital. The government can create incentives, but the government can't fund all these startups, right? So you need to have venture capital funds, angel investors, incubators who can help basically startups who have solutions, help them scale their operations and also compete on a global scale, right? Like we don't want the AI startups to only be limited to India. We want them to maybe focus on solutions which are India specific but can also work on a global scale, and they will need that support to take it forward. And India has like a lot of pre-existing existing conditions which are very favorable, right? Like we have talent pool. I think now you can say that we do have a startup culture as well. The current government is very appreciative of the role that startups play in our economy. So a lot of these conditions are already there. I think one specific suggestion that I had in this regard is also to look at following like a tech cluster development approach, right? So, I mean, we've already seen that with Bangalore. Uh, you have Silicon Valley in the US. London has this tech city. In Israel, you have Silicon Valley, is what it's informally called. So basically, by locating startups, tech companies, research institutions, and investors in close proximity with each other, you create an environment where collaboration and idea exchange happen like a lot more naturally. It also allows for a culture of innovation, access to talent, access to funding, knowledge sharing amongst the different entities. So I think specifically from the startups perspective, that's something that the government should really focus on in terms of how do you create these tech clusters, how do you get these people who are part of the same ecosystem together to make it easy for them. And I think the other thing is if you see a lot of the user-facing AI applications that are coming out right now, they're coming from the global north, right? Like they're coming from the West. So I think there's huge potential for Indian startups to focus on more Indic content and more local content. So content in Indian languages, because the thing is, India is such a diverse country. If you're able to build a product which works successfully in a place like India, in a market like India, where you have to take care of so much diversity, I think that also sets you up to sort of succeed in a global landscape, right? Where you were trying to find the common denominator that appeals to everyone from different backgrounds. So I think in that perspective, Indian startups are in a very good position to potentially take the lead and help take India to the front. A lot of this will also be linked to the quality of data available to the startups, and I think that's something we can discuss going forward. Yeah.
Let's take up that point regarding the quality of data that startups have access to. So we have this tech landscape that is dominated by big tech giants, right? And we have startups coming up that we need to ensure that they have access to data. Do you think government should intervene, and what measures can government take to ensure that startups do have access to good quality data, and so that an efficient AI system is facilitated while training and also maintaining security?
So I think for one thing, it's quite clear that this is something that the government has been thinking of. So there was the non-personal data sharing framework which came out, I think, in 22 or something, the latest last draft of that, which sort of tries to think about this aspect. And even in the India AI plan, they have talked about a national data management officer who will be set up under the mission to coordinate with various government departments. But this is on the government side. Now, if you're talking about, like you said, a lot of the data is with big tech companies. So I think from the government side, what you can do is you can't force companies to share data. I don't, that's not the approach to follow, but you can maybe, so you can establish frameworks for data sharing. So you can establish clear guidelines and frameworks for data sharing amongst government agencies, private enterprises, research institutions to promote collaboration while safeguarding data privacy and security. The other thing the government can do is implement robust data privacy regulations. So, I mean, that's already happening with the DPDP bill that came out last year, and hopefully we'll see the operationalization of the bill with the rules. So I think for to enable fair distribution of data amongst organizations, that is really something we need in place so that the security and data privacy culture is taken care of at all levels. So it's not something that you need to specifically check every time you're coming up with a framework, because if you have an overarching law, that sort of will take care of a minimum baseline protection for all frameworks. So the other thing is we also need to invest a lot in strengthening cybersecurity infrastructure and enforcing cybersecurity standards to safeguard data against unauthorized access, breaches, cyber threats, right? Like if you want to increase trust in data sharing, you also need to reassure all stakeholders that your data is secure. It will only be used for the purposes for which you've shared it. And every breach, every unauthorized access, every cyber threat chips away at that trust, right? Like, so building that trust is very important. And I think otherwise, just generally encouraging a culture of data sharing across different entities. I think that's something which is very important. And this is something which can be done either through, you can have incentives again, you can have awareness campaigns, you can have capacity building programs, because uh, how to share this data, how to set up data sharing framework is also very new for us, both from the government side. So capacity building in that regard is something that we really need to look at. So that we're able to address data being in different silos and promote collective action. And I would say maybe a lot more focus on data anonymization techniques is something that will really help. So it helps to protect individual privacy while allowing for data utilization for AI development. So I think that privacy enhancing technologies like that is something that should be really promoted. But I would say the most important thing is the government needs to solve its own privacy challenges and digitize its own public records. Because especially for us Indians, yeah, I mean, all the big tech companies do have a lot of data about us, but there is a lot of latent value in government data, right? The sort of data that the government has, especially if you're looking at more society-focused solutions, if you're looking at dealing with societal problems, if you're looking at education, if you're looking at healthcare, if you're looking at agriculture, a lot of the data that will help to build better AI products or build AI models which accommodate for these specific elements in the Indian context will really benefit from cleaned up and accurate data from the government side. So yeah, I think like everything else aside, the government needs to first digitize its own data and make it available in the format that's accessible and also protects the privacy of citizens.
We don't have an overarching regulatory framework for AI in India. And upon that point, EU just passed its AI law a few days back. So, should India take a cue from that, follow such regulatory approach, or should it establish an independent stance when formulating regulations for AI? Also, while ensuring that the needs that you mentioned for startups and for ensuring the anonymity of data providers, and ensuring that there are capacity building programs, awareness program that can enable the growth of AI ecosystem and in turn accelerate the economy's growth.
So I think from what we've seen in technology regulation in the last 5, 10 years, there is obviously what is known as the Brussels effect, right? Where Europe has really been at the forefront of technology regulation, and India should adopt a balanced approach that combines elements of both global perspective as well as an independent stance when formulating regulations for AI or looking at the approach. See, there are benefits to having a common global standard, because a common global standard which allows for country level flexibility, because this will allow international consumers to come to India. So if our regulatory framework is somewhat consistent with the global standard or the frameworks around the world, this will allow international consumers to India, and this will also ensure that Indian solutions can be exported globally. So from the perspective of enabling digital trade, I feel it's there is benefit in participating in international efforts and ensuring that there is alignment with international norms and standards to promote interoperability, collaboration, knowledge sharing. But at the same time, India needs to, we have a very unique socio-cultural context, especially when you're talking about technology like AI, which can have a huge impact like on people's daily lives. So it's important to make sure that we are able to address our own socio-economic and cultural context. So global efforts must allow countries to tailor the regulations to address local challenges. So, like for example, India, you have digital divide, you have even in terms of data privacy, we have the DPDP, but in terms of a privacy culture amongst Indian citizens, we are at a very early stage of that, right? Like the privacy culture that exists among citizens in US or Europe might not exist in India. So these are things that we need to keep in mind. Socioeconomic disparities are much wider in India than they are in these countries. So we should retain enough flexibility to sort of look at our own national interests and build capacity, exchange knowledge, and call for collective action on global issues like ethical AI, data governance, and cyber security. So yeah, like we should go for like a pragmatic approach that leverages the benefits of both global cooperation. So you have like common standards, common frameworks, as well as national sovereignty in shaping AI regulations. And I think a very interesting thing to look at here is so what we are seeing right now with especially semiconductors and other technologies, also weaponization of technology, right? Like the whole US China thing is because is a consequence of weaponization of technology. So I think the sort of strategy that India has been pitching at the global level for the last 2 years, so our DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure Strategy, which got a lot of attention at the G20 and the GPI summit last year. So I think this basically aims to build a multi-stakeholder digital foundation. So again, the sort of things that we talked about earlier, consistent and common technology standards, allowing for open innovation, data governance. And this is basically maybe an approach that India can uh, leverage and push for, especially for lower and middle income countries, right? In terms of how do you basically uh, allow these countries to access the benefits of AI, or figure out common regulatory frameworks or share technology and resources in a format which allows everyone to benefit. So I think India's DPI approach, how we are looking at technology and building technology products, is also something that we should push in terms of development of AI regulation globally.
Now, to my last question, those of us who are associated with AI technology or working in the field of AI usually say that technology is an enabler and it will help accelerate the nation's growth, help startups and everything. But there are also naysayers who think that the integration of AI across various sectors pose a potential threat to employment, and how do you respond to that integration of AI will lead to economic loss of job, and especially in a country where we have already mentioned there are socioeconomic disparities, there are sections of the population who are marginalized, already vulnerable to the use of technology. How do you respond to that?
So I would say, first of all, this is a conversation that happens with every new technology, right? Um, I think, like recently, I remember, so Rahul Matan is a very famous technology policy lawyer. He writes this newsletter which comes every week. And he talked about back in the 1800s, like when electricity was first being adopted, there was so many concerns about what would happen, also from the safety perspective. But we figured out how to do with it. And I think every time a new technology comes about, some jobs do get displaced, but a lot of newer jobs also get created, right? We've seen that with computers, we've seen that with the internet. And yeah, so the term is called automation risk. So AI has the potential to automate routine tasks, which might lead to some job replacement. But in the longer term, and especially even in the medium term, it creates new opportunities. It enhances productivity, allows for more economic growth. Like AI is basically, it's not a substitute for human intelligence right now, but it's a tool that complements human capability. It helps us get more efficient. It reduces operational costs. It drives innovation across industries. Like it is innovation that creates new jobs, right? And allows people to build new skills. And I think this is something that's already on the government's radar. So even in schools, you will see now there is a focus on, I think NCRT now has a specific part of the curriculum which allows like kids in seventh class, kids in ninth class to understand how you interact with AI. So it's important to keep looking at, keep training, keep building skills on AI related skills such as data analysis, machine learning, and programming to equip the workforce with skills needed for jobs for the future. And in the meantime, I'm not saying that there will be no friction at all. In the short to medium term, there will be some friction. So, policies promoting inclusive growth, social safety nets, job retraining programs, and lifelong learning initiatives can help ensure that the benefits of AI integration are equally distributed across society. And just to give you a couple of examples, so for example, Germany has this Industry 4.0 initiative, right? But one of the essential components of that initiative is also upskilling to address job displacement. Similarly, Canada has a Future Skills Center which focuses on workforce development to ensure that AI benefits are widely shared. So some initiatives like that will definitely be helpful. But my other point is a lot of these assumptions about job disruption are based on, again, Western countries. A lot of the data that leads to this analysis is based on these countries. In India, the process will be very different because in India, the labor costs in India are much lower, right? Over there, a lot of the basic skill-based and labor jobs are getting displaced because the cost of automation is actually working out, right? In India, that might not be the case because the labor costs in India are so much lower. The cost of automation will have to be even lower than that for it to lead to any serious disruption. So I would say in India's context, any assumptions on job disruption right now are too early. We need more detailed and comprehensive data on this. And I would actually say this is something that it would make sense for the government to also fund a lot of this because this will really help to inform policy, right? Like it's okay to talk about the risks of AI in making people lose jobs, but we need to make sure that when we're talking about these risks, they are informed and based on what is true for India, right? Like we can't create policies for India based on what's happening in other countries. So yeah, I think there will be some disruption, but I think India specific, how much that disruption should be, in what sectors will that disruption happen? I think we need a lot more data to understand that and then to have policy respond to that in a better manner.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sparing time for us.